In 2020, after the murder of George Floyd and the call for police reform, many school districts and police departments struggled with whether or not to keep officers assigned on their schools. Here in Mount Vernon, we continue to have an officer assigned at the high school and our middle schools. Joining me today in the roll call room is Officer Chris Carlson, our high school resource officer. He's here today to talk about what his job is and is not on campus. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's just get right into it. What is your role as a school resource officer?
Well, I think when you think about school resource officers, I think a lot of times there's misconceptions of what that actually is, right? The way that our system is structured and the way that I perform the role of a school resource officer is a lot less about enforcement, has nothing to do with discipline, and is much more as an educator, a kind of mentor of sorts. I deal a lot more with counselors and social workers than I do with law enforcement on campus. Okay. So my role is really focused more around building those relationships. It's community-based, it's intervention, prevention. All of those aspects are super important to this role. And I think why we have maintained this role for so long and why I think it's such an integral part of what we do at Mount Vernon Police Department.
Okay. So let's break some of those down a little bit. You mentioned being an educator.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
So there's a couple of ways, right? So police in general are educators. Sometimes we will pull someone over and we'll give them a warning. That's a form of education, right? So we have aspects like that, right? There's a lot of times where I'll deal with situations and I'm basically telling people now, listen, here, we're just gonna have a conversation. Out in the real world, if you give a police officer a fake name, these are the potential consequences,
that could
right?
be a problem.
So education in that aspect, right? Our position is somewhat unique also because through our CTE department, Career and Technical Education, I actually teach a criminal justice class. So I have a class every semester where I have a full class of students. Right now I have one period a day where I am discussing criminal justice aspects with them. We're going over their rights as citizens, as community members in the city of Mount Vernon, and then as juveniles, right? These are young people who, in theory, are going to be our community members, already are our community members, but are stepping into adulthood. And so helping them understand what that looks like in cooperation with law enforcement is a big aspect of it. So education from a lot of different angles.
That's actually a 4-credit class, right?
Yeah.
So you're actually a teacher.
Yep, actually a teacher. We just actually made it, it's a crossover, so now it's also counts as a social studies credit.
Okay.
So we've had some new developments in that. Before it was just a CTE elective, but now it kind of opens the doors with how the schedules have changed. They've been able to do some crossover stuff too. So yeah, full-time class. Getting some of those credits is a couple of my kids are like, I got to get this class, I got to graduate, right? Yeah. So they need that class. So, a couple of them gotten behind and we're trying to work on getting them caught up and stuff like that. So yeah, nice. Education from a lot of different aspects.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I imagine the education isn't just for students. You probably do some for staff and parents.
Yep.
What do you do there?
A lot of parents, right? A lot of parents will have questions about how to handle certain situations or have concerns about my child, and we'll basically go through like what their options are, some ideas on what to do next, things like that. Some will actually have some legal troubles, right? Like something happened outside of school and now all of a sudden they have a court case and they're like, what happens next, I've had students who have had unfortunate situations in their family life that will come to me and say, okay, well, this is the situation. Like my family dynamic has changed quite a bit just recently. Like now we're all having to go to court. What does that look like? Right. Sure. So a lot of aspects like that, have had some same situations with even like staff members like, hey, I got this thing in the mail. Like, is this a real ticket? Nope, that's not a real ticket. Like, just throw that away, right?
Don't send your money in.
Yeah, don't send your money. You're not inheriting, money from a Nigerian prince or anything like that.
I got this text that says I didn't pay my toll.
Yes.
Don't send that money in.
Don't do that, right? So there's a lot of aspects like that. Like one of the things that we had a problem at the end of last year is as students were leaving, they were just honking the horns excessively, right? And so I did a whole like thing on like, hey, just so you know, the horn is for specific reasons, and if you use it incorrectly, you can get a ticket for that, right? So kind of even just educating on something as simple as, you know, when to use your horn correctly,
which seems intuitive, but
seems common
sometimes.
sense. But you know, and that's the thing too, and that's where my role is different than on patrol, right? Like it's from a context of we're trying to help these students step into adulthood and teach them things before it becomes a problem, if at all possible.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to spend 10 years in a school. I was working in the elementary schools with DARE, and then the program that replaced DARE, and then in our high schools. And I had, I called it Warning Day. There's a certain stop sign up by the high school in the neighborhood there that kids just blew all the time.
Yep.
And so I'd sit out there and pull kids over and be like, all right, today is Warning Day.
Yeah.
You know, now I sit out here. Next time is Ticket Day.
Yeah.
So let's be respectful of the neighborhood too, because you get complaints from the neighbors.
Yes. Yeah. So if you think about it, we have on any given school day, we have almost 1,800 people with students and staff coming and going from the high school. That's a big impact on the surrounding neighborhood also.
And the parents doing drop off. Yeah.
So we have the drop off line is, you know, as chaotic as you would expect, even in high school. It's funny, the parking lot always starts out with lots of spaces at the beginning of the year, but towards the end of the year, it's very full because as the year progresses, more students get their driver's license. And so we have students who are learning combined with parents who are trying to pick up their kids, a lot of things that are all moving at once. And so we have natural environment for things to go wrong, natural environment for, you know, students to sometimes make poor decisions, which can lead to complaints from the neighborhood. So those are things that we kind of, you know, work with the neighborhood to try to figure out over the summer. I did a survey, kind of went door to door. What are the biggest problems? Where can we focus on the most? Met with our traffic unit before the school started. Hey, we're going to really try to focus on doing a lot of education early in the year, so that way we're not running into problems and throughout the year, and just kind of get ahead of things before they get out of control. So
kind of set expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that impacts not just during the school day. I mean, football games, basketball games.
Yep. Yeah. So like, and then when we have a football game, or what we've run into is sometimes they'll have events on the weekends. Parking lot will fill up, and then all of a sudden you have overspill into the neighborhood, right?
Prom night.
Yeah, prom night. So it's things like that can just lead to natural issues that we kind of just try to work with the neighborhood, understand that yes, this is part of the neighborhood, but this is also a part that makes this neighborhood great also, right? Is having this school nearby and being part of that neighborhood.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned school discipline. How much of that do you get involved with?
Absolutely zero, which I'm happy with. I don't want to partake in any school discipline. That is not, it's very specific that is not part of my role as an SRO. We leave that to the administrators. We leave that to the staff at the school. I only get involved when there's an actual law enforcement issue, which is really not as much as you would expect. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about my position is that people kind of assume like, oh, well, you're there, you know, prison to, or school to prison pipeline, things like that. You hear that referenced, right?
Just there to arrest kids.
Yeah, exactly. Put kids in the system early, and that's 100% not the case. I would make the argument that I have kept more kids out of the juvenile system than put in the system, and a lot of that's through that educational process. A lot of that is just mediating situations that sometimes, you know, get out of control, right? Misconceptions or miscommunications that occur over social media and stuff like that that have kind of blown up, and it's like, okay, let's all just sit down and talk about this, as opposed to just rushing through and calling the police and getting the courts involved and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
you talked about mentoring and really creating relationships, and there's a lot of ways to do that. And I actually got some pictures here that we can talk about. Right. So here, this one.
Oh yes, first day of school. Yeah. So obviously, you know, first day of class, I always tell people, I talk about donuts, right? Because I'm like, you know, who else likes donuts? Pretty much everyone, right? And I had one student who's like, well, I actually don't like donuts. And I'm like, okay, consider that a challenge, right? We'll see if we can get you a donut that you like. And so I just think it's one of those things where you can connect in a different way. We've all taken these pictures. Like I have kids of my own. We've taken first day pictures.
Yep.
It's one of those things. One of the bonus questions on my first test is always, what is my favorite kind of donut? And so that's on day one. And I'm like, okay, you're going to want to remember this.
Yeah.
And then half of them are like, oh my gosh, you can see where they can get to that point on the test. And they're like, oh man, what was it? And so it's a challenge.
Yeah.
But,
and do this. You've got your SRO Carlson Instagram page.
yes. Yeah.
So just like the kids on first day of school, we had you post
Yep.
one of these.
Exactly. So yeah, it's good. We'll do it again next year and keep the tradition going.
Yeah.
I always joke because it's my 4th year, so I'm always like I'm a senior, right?
Yeah.
So
there you go.
So and that's what's interesting too about this class is I came in when they're freshmen. So this is the first class that I've been there all 4 years that they've been there. So it'll be interesting. I've already been asked a couple of times, like, are you coming to graduation? And so, we'll see. It's one of those things that's just a fun thing to do. And the parade is also a fun event. So
out in the community.
Yeah.
Being a part and still representing both police and the high school at the same time.
And that's where, like, when you think about it, like a lot of community members, a lot of students, when they have an interaction with police officers, more often than not, outside of these types of things, it's not on the best day, right? Even something as simple as a collision, right, is a bad day. And so we have so many, instances where only people's interaction happens on their worst day. This is one of those things where we get to have a different type of relationship where it's not just on bad things, which is why we do so many of these community events like High Five Fridays or try to create those new things. These are awesome. These are from football games. We had students, it kind of became a tradition where they wanted to take a selfie. And so they would give me the phone. We'd take a selfie every football game. And it just kind of becomes one of those fun things to do.
Yeah.
Totally. Another way to kind of connect and build those relationships that are really long lasting, right? They don't go away.
Yeah.
So.
You mentioned some of the other things we do in the schools. We're actually so fortunate. We've been a part of this partnership with the school district for years. We were, even in the 80s, we were teaching DARE. And then, early 2000s, we started the high school resource officer program and the officers at the middle school. Even though we don't have an officer in the elementary schools anymore, we still try to keep the connection there. And so here we did a program with Little Mountain Elementary where they did breakfast and books. So we come in the morning, actually sit down, they've got books there, and we sit down and read with the kids in the morning. And then every Friday for High Five Friday, we're out there, we've got music, kids are excited, they come running in. We get, one of our really tall officers to put his hand up there high and see how much air the kid can get as he's getting up there doing that. So super fun. And Friday is just a fun way to start the day.
For sure.
With all the energy for us too.
Yeah, I've got a good High Five Friday story. So, during the summers, my since the school's out, sometimes I'll help on patrol. I'll be doing some other programming and stuff like that. But a couple of years ago, I was working patrol. We were arresting someone at Safeway, and they were not happy to be arrested. They were resisting. And so we're in the middle of trying to arrest this person on the ground. And then I hear this tiny little voice behind me. And I look up, and he's like, high five. And I'm like, hey, buddy, like, hold on. Like, where's your mom? Like, go scoot back. I'll get you. But so he stuck around because he wanted a high five. And so it's just one of those things. Like, I think before High Five Friday, that wouldn't have been, he's sitting there and his correlation with police is like, is friendly, right? Even when we're in this situation of trying to detain someone. So I tell my students that, and they get a crack up about that.
I saw that a lot when I was in the schools because you mentioned, kind of as a senior, you're following a whole group. I had 10 years, so I had a whole cohort of kids that I grew up with. And I remember an officer telling me, he's like, I get so sick of kids running up to me out on the street and saying, do you know Officer Shack? And I'm like, yes, but they're coming to you.
Right.
They're not scared and running away. They're coming to you.
So true.
Yeah.
It breaks down that barrier, right? Because like that's the thing, right? I don't have my vest on right now, but when we have all of our gear on, when we're doing our job, like sometimes we can look pretty serious. Like there's an aspect of it that is intimidating, right? And so once you have that relationship established with with some of our youngest community members, that lasts forever. That sticks with them.
Yeah.
So I think it's an incredibly important job, because a lot of these students, their perception of what police is being based off of how I treat them, the relationships that I'm creating with them,
Absolutely.
that stick with them forever. And so it'd be really easy to ruin that for someone in the wrong circumstance. Even I've even had students that have had the, you know, unfortunate situation where I've had to arrest them, or when they were in a physical confrontation and I had to, you know, it doesn't happen very often, but had to, like, you know, pull them off someone and become physical with them, where later on they come up and they're like, man, I'm so sorry that I put you in that position. And I'm like, it's okay. We just got to make, you got to make better decisions, right? You know?
I actually had that. One of my students, unfortunately, after I left the schools, I went and was a detective.
Oh yeah.
And one of my students actually committed a murder.
Oh yeah.
And so hard to watch and be involved in that investigation. But one of the things that happened after that is, a number of years later, I actually got a letter from him from prison, and saying that, hey, you know, if you get the opportunity, I'd love to sit down with you.
Oh yeah.
And so I actually went and sat down with him, and he was doing great.
Yeah.
He was running a program, a vermiculture program.
Oh wow.
So like worms and compost and thing, that he actually got grants from the Gates Foundation, and talked about, you know, hey, during that period of my life, you know, this was going on. I was having a hard time, and you know, I kind of see the error of my ways now, and it's unfortunate that it took that, but you know, still being able to reach out and go, hey, I appreciate, you know, the connection that we had as he was growing up.
And that's the thing, like without officers, you know, creating those relationships in the schools, that probably doesn't happen.
No.
Right? He doesn't reach out to you after, you know, you're part of the case that ultimately sent that person to prison, right? That relationship doesn't go away, right? They still have a different respect or even understanding of us just being, there's just a person behind all of this gear, right? So I think that's what makes it so special, for sure.
You talked about being out and involved in an incident, a kid waiting to high five. Have you seen where, you know, your connection with somebody, then you see them out on the street, can actually maybe de-escalate a situation?
Yeah, and I haven't. I imagine as my career progresses and I'm out on the street more often after I'm done with this position, I'll see that happen. But I've definitely had a situation, not so much in the street, but I've become aware of a situation where a student I'm familiar with has an incident out off campus, gets arrested, very serious charges, and then I'm able to connect with that student after the fact. And they're just basically like in that position. They're like, the first thing that they said to me was like, man, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, why are you sorry? He's like, I feel like it disappointed you. Right. And I had that moment of like, wow, like that's a kind of a powerful moment. Right. And so I think that there is a connection there with these students that is so different than any other aspect of policing, that I imagine if I was put in that position, the relationship that you have with somebody, even in a moment of crisis, might make the difference. Because I actually worked in the jail a couple of years prior to becoming a police officer, and I had a very, very similar experience like that from those relationships you make, even in that connection, right? Where now as a police officer, I'm like, hey, it's Carlson, and then they're like, oh, like they kind of like, oh yeah, wait, I recognize you, I'm familiar with you, so. Same thing. You know,
you're cool. You've always treated me with respect.
And respect is a big thing, right? It's a two-way street. So yeah, for sure.
Another education kind of piece that we do that you're heavily involved in is preparatory academy.
Yes.
Which is modeled kind of after our community academy. Talk a little bit about
so we have this will be the third one that I've done. This coming up this summer. It's the first week of August. It's a really fun week. We bring in different presenters from different departments within our department. We have the detectives will set up like a crime scene. We'll have a canine officer come in. They'll get to go out and do some radar and LiDAR on actual cars with some of our traffic officers. And then we cap off the week with like mock scenes. They get the opportunity to volunteer to get OC sprayed.
Which is pepper spray.
Yep. And so that's always a unique experience that when you actually get to experience. It's not something that you want to experience in real life, but in a controlled setting, oh, yeah, sure, I want to see what that feels like. I'm not sure how many of them don't regret the situation after it starts, but like I said, again, it's like it's a unique opportunity to kind of see behind the curtain of our department, get to understand, what we're about, how we police, what the career is really like, which I think has been incredibly beneficial throughout the years.
Because it really started as kind of a recruiting tool.
Right.
Hey, can we identify folks in high school that are interested in a career in policing and bring them in and teach them, hey, this is what it's kind of really like. So as you're trying to make those decisions in the future, this is what I want to do. Nah, this maybe isn't for me.
Right.
And it's been fun over the years to see students come through that actually become police officers.
Yeah, we have one that works for us now that's a former Prep Academy graduate.
Officer Brett Thompson.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. We have a couple that have gone through that I envision will be someday in Mount Vernon Police Department uniforms. And I think a lot of that, some of them have taken my classes, some have come from other schools and just heard about it. But I think it really helps them, because ultimately, like when somebody wants to become a police officer, you want them to make the most informed decision as possible. And so we want people to know what it's like, know what's expected of them before they make that commitment. So I think it's just a great program. The students love it. Everyone I've talked to said it's one of the best weeks of the summer. And that's the thing. You're asking these kids to give up a week of their summer vacation to come to, a different form of school. Granted, it's a pretty fun school, but it's a good time. So applications are open now. So hopefully we get, I've gotten quite a bit of interest already. So hopefully we get a full class this year and have another good year.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit about intervention. What kind of intervention programs or things you're involved in?
So I'm one of our gang resource officers. I've been a gang resource officer for several years now. One of the things that throughout the years, we've always had these intel meetings where we discuss trends and active cases, stuff like that. One of the things when me and a couple of the other gang resource officers were discussing is we had noticed this pattern of young people kind of showing up on our radar pretty early on, even before they're involved in criminal charges, right? And so it was one of those things where we discussed what can we do when someone shows up on our radar and we're like, yep, so-and-so is flirting with some criminal behavior, stuff like that.
Some risk factors there.
Yeah, absolutely. Some high risk behavior, right? Instead of just waiting for them to commit crime and then having a criminal record, what if we took a little more proactive approach, right? So we put together this group. It's called Intervention Prevention Action Group. We meet monthly. We meet with juvenile detention, probation. We're meeting with school officials. We've got several community resources involved, and we're discussing some of these concerns and then trying to create plans to intervene before it turns into a criminal incident. We've got a couple of students that we've kind of focused on in terms of just trying to provide support. We're more, the way I look at it, we're more a facilitator of trying to find resources before it falls into the, criminal justice system. And so we're just bringing all of the partners together. It really has a lot to do with school. We know what happens when students stop going to school. So we want to keep them engaged in school. We want to keep them engaged in activities that take their time, keep them away from negative behaviors, and create positive relationships that kind of gear them in the right direction, which is what that's focused on. So,
you talked a little bit about your career and you've done in the jail. Tell us about how you found yourself coming into policing and Mount Vernon PD in particular.
Yeah, so I went to school at Western Washington University. I was a marketing major.
Go Vikings.
Yeah. I was getting into some marketing classes, and I was like, I really don't, just didn't feel very passionate about it, right? And so that's really when I started to think about what it was that I wanted from a career, right? And really it came down to that idea of I really just want to serve my community, right? I really want to try to help people have a better life instead of try to sell them things they don't want, right? That was kind of one of the things that kind of geared me in that direction. I also had a lot of experiences as a child that were, affected by certain aspects of addiction, things like that made it kind of hit more at home to me, that made it, I want to be that police officer that can help someone else in situations like that. I had, as a child, I had negative experiences with police officers, and I had positive experiences with police officers. It was one of those things that it was like, I want to be part of the solution, and I want to be like those positive experiences as opposed to those negative ones that I experienced. So that really shaped a lot of why I wanted to be a police officer, but then also the police officer that I come to work to try to be every day.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned working in the jail. Specialty assignments you've held while you've been here?
Yeah. So I've done a few things. So started out the jail, came here. My first zone deployment was North River Commercial. So that area near Safeway and Goodwill, nothing ever happens there, right? Super quiet, never busy.
Right.
So it's quite busy area. Through that, I ran what's called the ORC group, which is Organized Retail Crime Group, where you meet with different businesses to try to curtail retail theft, right? You're meeting with loss prevention agents, discussing trends, discussing where you can put products in stores that are more likely to be stolen so they don't get stolen. I worked a lot with Safeway to have their liquor section be locked up. So unfortunately, you have to press the button and wait for somebody, but the amount of theft that helped reduce was the goal, right? I've also been a recruiter. I'm a lead officer. I'm a field training officer. And then I just got off the patrol tactical operations team, but I was on that for about 8 years as well. I think I'm probably missing something in there as well. Active threat.
Okay.
So I teach new officers how to respond to active threat and stuff like that. So, yeah.
A big role on campus too involves safety.
Yeah.
We had Adam Walker in talking about CEPTED, so crime prevention through environmental design. How have those concepts been implemented at the school?
Yeah, so a lot of it is those concepts are all over the place, right? For years, and you could probably attest to this too. For years, the campus was pretty open, right? So anyone could just walk into the middle of campus without having to check in somewhere. You could be in the middle of what we call friendship circle and not have to go through a building, right? So just before I started, previous school resource officer had worked with the school to get a fence that goes all the way around the campus. And that just limits access, right? It's access control, right? We only want people who are supposed to be on campus to be on campus. We also work with our landscapers on a regular basis to make sure that there's not hedges that people can be behind, right? We worked with a neighbor that had a fence that had constantly was getting graffiti put on it, right? So we did some painting on it, did a mural on it for Mount Vernon High School to kind of prevent that from happening again. So those aspects are all over. It's such a big concept that my final project in my criminal justice class is actually a CEPTED project. And so the students, what they're doing is they're learning the concepts of crime prevention through environmental design, and then they're doing their own analyzation of the school campus, what could make it better, what could make it more safe, what are the biggest issues that you see that kind of take away from the school experience and from learning, and what do you think would make the school better, right? A couple of years ago, one of the ideas was we have this, archaic hall pass system where you just take a pass from class and go walk around, right? And so we looked into different types of hall pass systems. Ultimately, the school was already looking at something like this anyways, but it's one of those things where the students got to feel like they were part of the solution. We now have a smart pass system that's like basically a digital hall pass system. The nice thing is you can tell how many times a day a student is going to the bathroom, right? If we have one student who's going to the bathroom 20 times a day, two things are happening, right? Either there's a medical issue that we need to address, or maybe a social issue that we need to address. So it's a big aspect of it, and the students really like, I think, being part of the solution to making the school a better place
Gives
also.
them some ownership.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So a lot of times we've seen in the news over the years about different things like swatting and threats that happen on campus. How much have you had to deal with that?
It's one of those things where there's a lot of things that go into safety of a school campus, right? There's obviously having a armed police officer on campus is a big aspect of making our school less desirable for something bad to happen. But that doesn't mean we don't prepare for worst case scenarios anyways, right? We spend a lot of time on our standard response models in terms of lockdowns, stuff like that, reunification exercises. We did a big reunification exercise last year. In
So
terms
that's in connection with the school and the admin and the security team there, not just the police.
Yeah, not just us. That's with the school district, and that's where some of my expertise in terms of safety and stuff like that, a lot of the training that I've gone to is in these models of how to do these specific exercises, but then also just preparing for if they were to really happen, being prepared for that. And so that way, when it's a stressful situation, we're more prepared for worst case scenario. So we have that. In terms of threats, we've had little things here and there. I think that's one of the things where having a resource officer on campus all of the time makes it not as big of a concern or traumatic event when people see a police officer, right? We had an incident where we got a tip from the FBI that led back to a student who was making some comments that were concerning, right? And so I get to go to the class. I go with admin. We pull them out. But whereas people see me in a hallway, it doesn't create the alarm. Whereas a school that's not used to seeing a familiar face in uniform is gonna be like, oh my gosh, there's a cop out there, right? Where it's just like, oh yeah, Officer Carlson, he's doing his thing, whatever. You know what I mean? And so there's an aspect of that's been really nice. The other thing is we did have. There was a couple of years ago, there was a big swatting day where we had tons of robocalls all up and down the I-5 corridor. The call came in and it's basically your worst case scenario, right? Everything that you are afraid of as a parent, as a administrator, as a staff member at a school, it comes in, shots fired in a math class, screaming in the background, all of those things, right? Me being on campus, I get that call immediately, and me also having familiarity with the campus and knowing where math classes are, for example, I'm able to be in that building with administrators within 10, 15 seconds, right? Okay, let's go check it out. We're in that building. Of course, obviously, I still have police officers responding with extreme urgency because these are our most vulnerable people, right? Young people are vulnerable to this situation. We don't want them to have to experience that. But because I'm on campus, because I was able to get into that building so quickly, we were able to very quickly realize that this might be a swatting incident. And for those who might not know, swatting is basically a fake call that is designed to elicit a SWAT response, right? To basically cause chaos and trauma, right? Because we were in there so quickly and were able to determine that it wasn't an actual threat, we were able to not go into lockdown, not even have to disrupt learning whatsoever, right? The other thing that you have to take into account too is, because I've been there on the other side of that text where my student, my daughter's school got locked down.
Scary.
And it's scary, right? You think about productivity as far as when you're at work and you're just waiting for that next text that says the lockdown's been lifted, right? On that day, we never went into lockdown. We actually had to call the front desk and be like, hey, just in case anybody calls, this is what just happened. And they're like, what are you talking about, right? We're like, well, this is what came in, right? But we were able to eliminate that. I was able to slow down the officers. They obviously still came, but they came with their lights off. They just kind of staged. So that way we checked the rest of the school, made sure that there wasn't, any type of real threat. Other schools were in lockdown for hours while SWAT teams showed up and searched the school. So when you think about, lockdown for a student is huddled in a corner in a dark classroom, right? And so to eliminate that, experience for a student by just having police officers on campus was huge for us.
And a regular patrol officer's got no idea where the math wing is.
Yes, and that's the thing too, is like, what that looks like for a school that doesn't have a school resource officer is most likely a couple of patrol officers coming into the main office, probably with rifles, because we want to end the threat. We want to protect people, protect human life as quickly as possible. And so that experience, even for that front office staff, of having police officers run in with rifles would be a traumatic experience, right? And then the response time just a lot slower too.
Yeah.
So
remember one we had when I was there. It was a bomb threat in the PE locker room.
Yeah.
And we were pretty confident that it wasn't real, but we still wanted to do our due diligence. And so again, knowing the school and the schedule and how it operates, we were able to actually get a hold of the bomb squad, State Patrol, and we just, during class, while kids were out in the gym, we were able to get the bomb dog in the back door, do a full sweep of the locker room, and then leave. Students had no idea that even happened.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Such a benefit.
And that's the ideal situation, right? You take the threat, you make sure it's not real, and then hopefully not disturb anybody's day of learning, which is why they're there. So perfect scenario.
Handle with care.
Oh yes.
Talk about that.
I'm excited about this. This is great. One of the things that kind of blew me away when I started working at the schools was how little the school system really knows about what happens in a student's life outside of school. To the point of just, and high schoolers aren't coming to school and airing all their dirty laundry, right? So, and I teach a class, and it's difficult to get students to talk anyways, right? So they're not going to come and talk about the challenges that they're facing outside of school. What Handle with Care is basically, it's a confidential notification system. So when police or first responders have an incident that exposes juveniles to a potentially traumatic event, it basically sends a notification to the ESD,
Educational Service District.
Yeah, and they're basically the hub of school safety for Whatcom, Skagit, and Snohomish County, right? So they do it in all three of those counties for our ESD, and so it sends them a notification. They contact the school district, and they basically send a confidential message that just says "Handle with Care." And the reason that this is so important is because if a student is experiencing or exposed to a traumatic event like the night before school, how can you really expect them to be at their full capacity the next day? Right. And so we've had a couple of incidences where, a student might be falling asleep in class, they get sent to the office, and I'll look it up and I'm like, well, obviously this is why they're falling asleep, is the police were at their house at 3:00 in the morning, right? And they're still at school, right? Because that's the routine, right? So what it does, it doesn't give any details of the incident. It doesn't give any, it doesn't mess with any of the investigation aspects. It keeps the personal information private. It just notifies the school that in case something happens, like, give a little bit of grace, like understand that there was an incident that occurred, and so this could play into the factor of a changed behavior or a disruption of any kind that is out of the normal. Yeah,
because ultimately, if a kid's struggling, you want to help them through that process.
Yeah, and the way I've explained it too is it might be something where we get a Handle with Care notification, and really nothing. It just sits there, right? And so, like, let's say we get one in early, early May, and student is doing well. Before then, a couple weeks later, teachers are like, well, the student is not showing up to class. Like, grades were good before. Now we go like a month later and notice that this coincided with this Handle with Care thing. That kind of directs us in a direction of knowing that there's a situation that has changed, and then that way we can provide the supports that are necessary.
And not necessarily us as police officers, but counselors, teachers.
It's rarely going to be us, really, because it just gives them a context of there's something that happened outside of home to change the situation for that student, and now we need to come up with different types of supports within that school structure.
If they need them.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Well, Chris, you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
at the schools. Again,
Yeah.
being a former SRO is probably
Yeah.
the favorite positions I
Yeah,
held.
it's very rewarding
Yeah.
in a unique way.
Yeah, and we're so fortunate that the school district continues to be a partner
Yeah, absolutely.
in this. And so thank you for
Yeah.
what you're doing, and thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That concludes this episode of the Roll Call Room. If you enjoyed this conversation, hit subscribe and check out our Facebook and Instagram pages so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching. See you next time, right here in the Roll Call Room.